Hello guys, and today I'm gonna talk to you about assessing writing skills. Let's get into the table of content. So we've got 4 parts in our lesson today. First, we need to understand what writing is. And in writing, we've got process writing and product writing. We'll get into later what those are. Next, we've got defining writing assessment. Of course, we have to learn what assessment is and what writing assessment really means in the academic context. Next, we've got the types and purposes of writing assessment. Obviously, we'll get into the types and the purposes of each type. Last but not least, we've got the 4 key components of writing tests. And those 4 components are the following: the task, the writer, the scoring procedure, and the reader. As scheduled, we first go into understanding writing. So as said earlier, we've got 2 types of writing: product writing and process writing. Product writing is a traditional approach in which students are encouraged to mimic a model text and write based on it. In the first stage, students read model texts and highlight their features. Next, they practice the highlighted features, and then they organize ideas. In the last stage, they will use learned or taught skills, structures, and the vocabulary above to write their piece. On the other hand, we've got process writing, which focus more on classroom activities, which promote the development of language use. For example, brainstorming, group discussion, things like that. In the first stage of process writing, students generate ideas by brainstorming and or discussion. Next, they extend ideas into note form and judge the quality and usefulness of the ideas. In the third stage, students organize ideas into mind map before writing their first draft. After they've finished, they will exchange drafts with their peers and improve their first draft based on their peers' feedback. After that, they will write the final draft and, of course, exchange the writings again so they will receive more comments. So that is the basic, so that you can get a clearer picture of what product writing and process writing really is. I got a table over here which demonstrate the differences between the 2 types. First, the texts in the product writing method is used for students to imitate. Meanwhile, process writing uses text as a resource for comparison. Next, the ideas. In product writing, organization of ideas are more important than the ideas themselves. In process writing, however, ideas are used as a starting point. In other words, ideas are the crux and the cream of the whole thing. Next, draft. In product writing, you usually have only 1 draft. While in process writing, there are more than 1 draft, of course. Next, the type. Product writing usually involves individual work or whole class activities. The students dissect the text and then they write their own piece, and that's basically it. While in process writing, it's usually collaborative work. You can see it in the stages of the process writing method. The students are encouraged to discuss the ideas and debate their ideas, and then exchange drafts with their peers for feedbacks. The focus of product writing is, of course, on the end product. And meanwhile, process writing emphasizes on the creative process. For example, the purpose, the theme, the text type, things like that. So, what to use in what kind of situation? Of course, it depends on the circumstances. For example, with formal letters, like job applications, they have fixed features. So we can use product writing for students to focus on the parts and the kinds of structures that are often used in the writing. And for discursive essays, of course, these kinds need ideas and use ideas as the main part. So it is more effective to use process writing. Of course, they can also be integrated. For example, in the first step, for example, writing discursive essays. In the first step, students can study the form of the model text. They will dissect how many parts, how many paragraphs are there, and then what those parts represent. Are there any kind of model sentences that they could use in their writing? Next, brainstorm, exchange, and judge ideas. Of course, this is from process writing method. And the third part is to draft and for peer feedback. Of course, it's also process writing. And when product writing and process writing are integrated, it can push optimal learning in students, of course. So that is about writing. What about writing assessment? What does that really mean? Well, of course, we have to understand what assessment means first. So assessment is the gathering of information about students' learning. It can be used for formative or summative purposes, and it is a key instructional activity that teachers engage in daily, whether formally or informally. That's assessment. And writing assessment, it is a process of assessing students' writing and performance. It occurs at many different stages throughout the courses and could come in many different forms. And teachers usually take on different roles. For example, motivator, collaborator, critic, evaluator, etc., and give different types of response depending on the circumstances. By this, they mean that sometimes teachers are the critic, or the evaluator. These happen when teachers are judging the students' writing. They point out mistakes, maybe, and point out what is wrong with the students' ideas. For example, they can be motivator. When students are brainstorming for ideas, for example, the teachers can stand aside and let the students work their brain, let the students shoot their ideas instead of giving the students their ideas. So that's the definition. Third, we've got the types and the purposes of writing assessment. So there are 5 types of writing assessment: teacher assessment, peer assessment, self-assessment, external written assessment, and portfolio assessment. First, we'll get into the 3 types that are pretty familiar in Vietnamese high school. Teacher assessment is basically using measurable terms to determine the student's level of knowledge and skills in a particular area, and the appropriate teaching strategies and goals for the students. For example, teachers assign students writing assessment and mark them. So by doing that, the teachers understand where students are in their ability and to see if their teaching strategy is correct, or should they make any amendments. Next, the purpose of teacher assessment is to record progress, to identify students' weakness, as mentioned above, and to adjust future methods. The advantages of teacher assessment is that the learning and teaching progress is continuously improved. Of course, if the teacher always assesses her students, she or he can see what the students lack and how they progress throughout the days, throughout the course. The cons is, of course, that it takes up a lot of the time for teachers. There are usually 30 to 40 students, and if the teacher if the teacher had to mark all of that, he or she will become exhausted. Next, we've got peer assessment. Of course, peer assessment is the assessment of students' work based on a set of criteria by other students of equal status. For example, student 1 write the first draft of a topic and exchange them with their classmates. As simple as that. The purpose of peer assessment is to simply increase the awareness of the soft skills of writing and to understand assessment criteria better. Because when the students have to mark the other students' paper, they will be aware of what they need to focus on. So they understand criteria much better than just writing. And of course, they can also improve their own writing by doing that. The pros are, of course, to increase students' judgment skills and or critical thinking, which is very good. And it encourages involvement and responsibility. The disadvantages are some students may feel ill-equipped for the task. Because in the classroom, many students are not of the same level. Some may be very, very weak in writing, so they can't or they're not confident enough to judge other students' writing. Next, we've got self-assessment. Is of course students assess their own written work and progress. For example, students write a draft on a topic and is instructed to judge their own writing based on criteria given by teachers. The purpose of self-assessment is to reflect on students' strengths and weaknesses and to develop editing skills such as drafting, redrafting, even commenting feedback skills. Okay. And the pros of self-assessment is that students become critical in thinking. Of course, because it is not easy to be able to face up to their own weaknesses and point out where they need to progress. So they need to be very critical in their thinking. The cons is that it takes time to learn how to self-assess because students in their piece of writing, students did their best, and sometimes they may not be able to point out where they did wrong. And teachers need to be very careful about self-assessment and teaching students how to self-assess correctly. Next, we've got external written assessment, which is a form of written assessment in which test tasks are specified, assessed, or marked by an awarding organization and is taken under a specified condition. For example, we've got written assessment at the end of the course or the year, summer term assessment, and the purpose of external written assessment is to assess the levels of students on a big scale, or to see if they're suitable for said organization that conducted the test. The pros of this type of assessment is that students see where they are among their peers, and students have a clearer picture of their levels and can set goals to better themselves. The cons of external written assessment is that there is no moderation because the test tasks assessed by the organization is only under one group of teachers or lecturers. And because sharing and agreeing upon judgments of different teachers can lead to consistent evidence-based judgments. So external written assessment may not be moderate. And next we've got portfolio assessment. So a portfolio is a purposeful collection of students' work that presents their effort over a period of time. And so we've got portfolio assessment, which is an authentic assessment that provides a more comprehensive picture of what the students know, understand, and can do. For example, we've got writing examples from various genres, journal entries, writing checklists, rough drafts, and final versions of texts or things like that. The purpose of portfolio assessment is to give students a sense of ownership in their work and to make students reflect on their learning. The pros of portfolio assessment is that it increases communication among teachers, students, and parents, and learners are more active in their learning. And learners can clearly see how they've progressed. The cons of portfolio assessment is that it can be demanding for parents, teachers, students, and there's no valid grading criteria. In the last part, we've got 4 key components of writing assessment. And the 4 key components are the task, the writer, the scoring procedure, and the reader. First, we go into the task. The requirements of a writing task is that it needs to be clear. It means that instructions don't cause confusion for the students. Second, the task needs to be valid. The task measures what it intends to measure. The third requirement is that the task is reliable, that the task results accurately measure the students' levels or abilities. And the last criteria is that the task needs to be provoking. It means that the task raises interest or causes the students to think about a matter. There are 6 factors that affect the task. First, the subject. So it is the general content area students are asked to write about. So we've got personal topic, which generates personal feelings, and general topic, which generates critical thinking. We've also got stimuli. And for example, stimuli like a reading passage, a brief quotation, a drawing, things like that. And it provides content for test takers to write and provide a common basis of information. Next, we've got cognitive demands. It means the level of thinking required to accomplish certain tasks. For example, apply, analyze, evaluate, things like that. And next we've got genre. In other words, rhetorical tasks. So in the genre, there's an intended form, which is maybe a letter, a postcard, a report, and it has an intended function. And sometimes it is a communicative function, which is describing, inviting. Sometimes it's discourse function, narrating, arguing, describing. Other than the genre, there's also an exposition, which is a specific instruction to the students. For example, the task may ask them to write a cause and effect essay, a comparison, a contrast essay, and also the task will be given a prompt, which is the written instructions to students. It's usually short, simple, and sufficiently detailed, and it includes audience, role, tone, length, and time. There are some of the few examples I give here is of the FCE writing test task. Next, we go into the writer. So when it comes to the writer, there are a few factors that affect them. Those factors are, first of all the factors that made up the test. The subject, the cognitive demands, the genre, the prompts, things that we just talked about earlier. And there are also internal factors, which is the factors that the writers themselves have. Their knowledge, their cognitive skills, their language levels, things like that. And of course, they got external factors to worry about as well, like the environment, the room, the temperature, their health, their mood, etc. Next, we've got the scoring procedure. So there are 3 kinds of scoring procedure: holistic scoring, primary trait scoring, analytic scoring. I've given you a table right here to get to know the kind of scoring and differentiate among the 3 kinds of scoring. First, holistic scoring. is it is a kind of scoring that assign a single score to a student based on the overall impression of the product. It assessed students' products as a whole for the overall quality, and it focused the reader's attention on student strengths. The pros of this kind of scoring is that grading is fast because you only have to give one score to the whole test. And the cons is that it does not provide useful diagnostic information about one's ability, and it is not easy to interpret. Like when you look at that test, you only see one score and you don't know where that student is lacking and where their strengths lie. Next, we've got primary trait scoring, which is the achievement of the primary purpose of an essay is the only factor rated. The characteristic of primary trait scoring is as follows. It focuses on how well students can write a narrowly defined range of discourse, and organization, supporting details, fluency, syntactic variety, and other features will also be evaluated, but is not as emphasized. And the pros of this kind of scoring is that it focuses on the function, of course, as the definition has given us. And the cons is that other aspects get sidetracked. Last but not least, we've got analytic scoring, which is separating various features into components for scoring purposes. This kind of scoring usually consists of 5 components: organization, ideas, development, grammar, punctuation or spelling, quality of expression. And the advantages of this kind of scoring is that it offers more watchback and helps to call the students' attention to their weak points. And it is easier to train graders to use analytic scoring schemes. The cons being that it requires more time for teachers to attend to details within each of the categories. For example, when teachers look at a piece of writing, they don't immediately get to focus on the 5 components, but they need to concentrate on each component, so it takes a lot longer, and they need a lot more time to gather their thoughts and mark the students. Because holistic scoring is mostly used in high school in Vietnam, so it's pretty familiar. And analytic scoring is something that Vietnamese students usually see in like IELTS tests. So I'm not gonna provide an example, but the primary trait scoring is something that people do not usually see. So this is an example of primary trait scoring. In this example, the scoring focus on the description. So you see there are a lot of scales for the description only. See, we got excellent, good, average, poor to very poor. And you see in the description that, the description is the only thing that is rated. Last but not least, we've got the reader. So why are the readers important? Well, it's simple. How students write is based on the person they're writing to. For example, write an email to your friend. So if that reader is your friend, then students will of course use informal language. And if it's something like write an email to your boss, then of course they're gonna use formal language because they're speaking to their superior. So it's important to consider the target readers to yield the appropriate responses from students. And that is all that I have to offer to you about assessing writing skills. And thank you for listening.